to today's Buddhism 101 meeting. The goal of the Buddhism 101 meeting is simply just an informal introduction into Buddhism, a way to learn a little bit about Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy. The Buddhism that we practice here, and I'm going to go in a little more detail since we have so many, we have about 4 new faces today. The Buddhism we practice here is Western Buddhism. And so as I alluded to earlier, Buddhism has many different, I guess you could call them denominations, sort of the way Christianity has different denominations. Western Buddhism, as it's developing, because it's still evolving, tends to focus more on the philosophical and psychological aspects of Buddhism, and less so on the religious aspects. We do not see, in Western Buddhism, Buddha is not a god. In fact, the majority of Western Buddhists believe in the story where the Buddha himself said, "I'm not a god." But we see him as a respected teacher, a respected individual who achieved a state of being where he transcended suffering. And our goal is to try and find out how to do that ourselves in order to diminish and eventually eliminate suffering in our lives and enhance our joy, enhance our peace. During the Buddhism 101 services, we have 3 main parts. The first part we're in right now, which is I'm just giving instructions and basic orientation. After that, we'll do 10 minutes of meditation. And after the 10 minutes of meditation, I will give a short Dharma talk and then open it up to any questions or discussions. Today is a great meeting to come to if this is your first time, because we're actually going to cover the very first teachings of the Buddha, the foundational teachings of the Buddha. These teachings, the Four Noble Truths, are considered to be the only teachings of the Buddha, because every other teaching of the Buddha after this were in support of the Four Noble Truths. So that's how important the Four Noble Truths are to Buddhism, especially, and also to Western Buddhism, especially where we focus more on the philosophy and psychology of Buddhism. For the meditation, so let me give you instructions now on meditation. If you have your own meditation practice, feel free to do that and continue with that. If you are experimenting with meditation or trying it for the first time, I'm going to give you 3 methods that we usually recommend here. The first method is to simply focus on the sensation of breathing. So as you're breathing in, focus on how it feels, maybe on the back of your throat, or how it enters your nose, how it fills your lungs. And as you exhale, the same thing. How does it feel on your upper lip? How does it feel the warmth of the air? And you're just going to focus and remain focused on the sensation of breathing, how it feels to breathe. The second method that we teach here is one of counting your breath. And so you simply count your breaths until you get to 10. And once you get to 10, you start over again with 1 and keep counting. If you lose count or you get distracted, then you simply start over again with 1. And the third method is using a mantra or a gatha, a phrase or a word that you repeat over and over again. This phrase or word can have meaning or it could be nonsensical. The idea is that you will repeat this over and over again. In all instances, if you get distracted, which very often most people do, even master meditators at some point or other will have meditations where they feel distracted. And so the practice of meditation, or the practice of mindfulness specifically, comes when you notice that you're distracted and then refocus your attention on the breath. And that act of noticing and then refocusing is the practice of mindfulness. And it's what will help you become more mindful throughout the day. So it's like the 5-pound weight if you're doing curls or something, and you're just starting off with that. And then as you get more and more experience with mindfulness, you will see that it will have more and more an effect on your daily life. But you got to start somewhere. And so focusing on the breath seems to be the most ancient and the most useful of techniques. One of the things I often say is the benefit of focusing on the breath is that you take your breath with you wherever you go. And so you don't need music, you don't need incense, you don't need a special mat or a special cushion. When you make the focus of your meditation your breath, then all those other things are just sort of little extra comforts, but they're not needed. All you need is your breath. We talked about distraction. For now, while we're doing this virtually, you want to just be in a position that is comfortable enough that you don't fall asleep, but not so comfortable that you fall asleep, but comfortable enough that any discomfort is not a distraction. But if you feel discomfort, pain, or pressure points or whatever, and it is distracting you or keeping you from being able to be mindful or focus on the breath, feel free to shift around and make yourself comfortable. Good. I think that is all on the instructions I'll give for today. I will end the instructions with one more teaching. One of the things I have repeated multiple times already is the importance of being grateful for your breath. That gratefulness for your breath can help you with your meditation. When you consider that there are people struggling to breathe right now because of the COVID outbreak, when you consider that there are people taking their last breath, when you consider how lucky and fortunate you are to be able to breathe, that gratitude can help support your meditation practice. And so if you want to, a mantra or a gatha that you can repeat over and over again as you're breathing is, thank you, or thank goodness I can breathe, or thanks. And just repeat that over and over again. Gratitude has been shown to be immensely related to a sense of peace and a sense of joy. And so being grateful for little things like being able to breathe can help enhance your personal joy and peace throughout the day. So get yourself in a position that is comfortable. I will ring the bell here shortly and we will begin. Once again, welcome everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths were the first teachings of the Buddha when he came across the five ascetics. The five ascetics were men that he practiced very extreme forms of asceticism. Last week when I talked a little bit about the history of the Buddha, talked about how at first the ascetics believed that he had fallen off the ascetic wagon and were disappointed in the Buddha. But then as the story goes, the legend goes that as the Buddha approached them, they noticed that there was just something different about him. There was just something brilliant, bright about him. He seemed to shine. There seemed to be a peace about him that was atypical, not something they had encountered before. And when the Buddha started teaching them, the very first teaching was the Four Noble Truths. What I'll do here is I'll talk a little bit about, I'll mention all Four Noble Truths first, and then I'm going to go through the first three, and then I will be breaking up the last one into multiple sessions, and you'll understand why. If you've never heard of the fourth one, it's called the, well, I won't spoil it. So let me go over the Four Noble Truths. The first one is, in life, there is suffering. In life, there is suffering. The second Noble Truth is, there is a cause to the suffering. The third Noble Truth is, there is a cure for this suffering. And the fourth Noble Truth is, the cure to the suffering is the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. So I'll cover the first three, and what I may do is divide the Eightfold Path into three sections and discuss them into those three sections. And those three divisions will make sense when I get to them, because I'll show you how they're typically grouped together. But let's focus on the first three today. The first one is, in life, there is suffering. So I've seen this first Noble Truth mistranslated as life is suffering. And that's simply not true. We know from our own experience, if we draw from our own experience, we have experienced moments of love, moments of joy, moments of peace. We know that life is not 100% suffering. And so I have found that the more accurate translation seems to be, in life, there is suffering. Now the word used is dukkha, and suffering is a good enough term for the translation for dukkha, but it doesn't quite capture the element of longing. And so in the translation of dukkha, this suffering stems from a longing for something. This would be a longing for material goods, a longing for health, a longing to not be sick, a longing to be respected, to be loved, a longing to be millionaires and win both the Mega Million and the Powerball so we can be billionaires. So those longings, that's dukkha, that suffering. There's this element of reaching out. I'm striving to get something and I'm not getting it. The Mick Jagger song, can't get no satisfaction, is dukkha. All right, so when you hear that song, when I hear that song, I just think of dukkha. That's part of dukkha. It's a suffering, it's a longing, it's a dissatisfaction. Right? And one of the beautiful things about this first Noble Truth is that it captures a universal of the human condition. It captures a universal for all living beings. So we can see, while we'll never know for sure until we can read their minds, we can see that animals suffer. And some scientists are interpreting certain reactions by plants as a pain reaction. And so some scientists will say that plants can experience pain, a type of primitive pain. It's not the same pain that we experience. Now, whether they actually suffer, I don't know, because for me, the way I conceptualize suffering requires a bit of thinking. It requires more than just the experience of pain. In fact, I will later on do a Dharma talk on pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is a neurological experience. We have pain receptors and pain neurons. And there's a specific part of the brain that registers pain. But there is no specific region of the brain that experiences suffering. And suffering occurs in multiple regions of the brain outside of the pain center. So pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And that kind of gives us a preview of the third noble truth, but I won't jump ahead just yet. I want to focus on this idea that suffering then is a universal experience, and it binds us together, it brings us together. One way you can know if you have a deeper understanding of this first noble truth is if you can see the pain and suffering in your enemy. So if there is someone that you dislike, if you were very unhappy about the events of last week, or if you suffered from the results of any election, but you were still able to see the pain and suffering in the other, then that is a sign that you have a deeper understanding of this first noble truth. We all suffer. We all experience that suffering. And anyone who is engaging in unhealthy behaviors is also suffering under the definition given to us by Buddhism. So in life, there is suffering. The next noble truth is that there is a cause for this suffering. And the cause of this suffering, if I had to give a oversimplification of it, the cause of our suffering is a desire. And so anytime you are suffering, if you ask yourself, what is it that I am desiring right now? That desire is the source of your suffering. So if I am suffering an illness, if I got the flu and I'm in the bed with fever and I'm feeling miserable, the desire to not have the flu is going to create suffering in me. So I'm not saying here that we should want to have the flu or that we should like our suffering. I'm not being a sadomasochist here. What I'm saying is that there is an acceptance of the reality that is characteristic of Buddhism. I am sick with the flu. I am feeling discomfort, but this will end. And so there's this balanced view of illness. Yes, I don't like being sick. It's not pleasant to be sick, but I should neither push it away nor want it. I should just be with it and accept that it's going to eventually go away. And if you think of any element of suffering, any experience of suffering in your life, it's easy for the most part to find what is the underlying desire. When you lose a loved one to death, when you have this strong desire to hold them again, to speak to them again, the harder you hold on to that desire, the more you suffer. So notice that this second noble truth isn't saying whether the suffering is good or bad, or whether the desire is good or bad. It is simply saying in a neutral tone that the causes of our suffering are often desire. More deeply than desire, when you start reading the sutras, which are the holy scriptures of Buddhism, underlying desire is ignorance. And so that term can be an insult. If I called each of you ignorant, not only would I be correct from the Buddhist perspective, but some of you might get offended. But from the Buddhist perspective, it's not ignorant in terms of you lack intelligence. Ignorance from the Buddhist perspective is that you're not completely aware of the big picture. You don't have all the details. Okay, let me give you an example. If I'm walking down a road at night and I see a shadow off to my right, I don't know what that is. Is that a person crouching down with a knife, a robber? Is that a tree stump? Is that a deer? Is that a bear? And so the not knowing and not having the full picture, that ignorance, could cause fear within me. So it's creating suffering within me and may motivate me to walk faster so I can get out of there. But if I had a light, if someone turned on the sun all of a sudden, or if I had a bright flashlight, and I were able to shine it upon the shadow, then I would no longer be ignorant. I would know, and I would know whether I should be fearful and run, or whether I'm okay. That light, you can say, is a sort of a metaphor or a symbol of mindfulness. So the more you cultivate mindfulness, the more you're able to see the reality of the situation, the less you are going to suffer, because you are dispelling the ignorance that is underlying your suffering. Many times, a lot of our suffering is due to an aversion or an attachment. So an aversion is we judge something to be bad and we try to push it away. And an attachment is usually we find something pleasant, and so I grasp it and I want to hold on to it, and I never want to let go. So attachments, aversions, desires, ignorance of the big picture of reality, all of these things create suffering. They are the causes of suffering. Now, before I move on to the third noble truth, I want to point out that the first noble truth is part of a cause and effect cycle with the second noble truth. Suffering, there is a cause of that suffering, and that cause is creating suffering. And that suffering can create more causes of suffering, and it can be in a vicious cycle. So we can very easily spiral into the depths of depression. That we can be very easily taken over by our anger and our passions. So there's this cycle that we can often get caught into. But then comes the third noble truth and tells us that there is a cure for this suffering. And while many scholars can argue about whether Buddhism is a religion or not, it is very hard to say that Buddhism is not a faith, because it is this third noble truth that introduces the need for faith. The faith that there is a cure for suffering. There is nothing that guarantees you right now that there is a cure for suffering. My words should not be enough to convince you that there is a cure for suffering. And so this third noble truth introduces the necessity for faith. I have faith that there is a way to cure the suffering. Buddhism may be the answer, Christianity may be the answer. It's up to me to explore those issues and to find that cure. So, and I have faith that I can be happy. I have faith that I can be at peace. So there is an element of faith to Buddhism. And without that faith, it's very difficult to practice. Why are you going to practice something that you think is not going to work? So the third noble truth calls us to even just a little bit of faith in the teachings of Buddhism, to try it out, to try it on, to gnaw on it and chew on it a little bit, and decide for ourselves how much we will take in. And so the Buddha, you will find many examples of him encouraging his followers to question the teachings. The Buddha himself has said, question everything, even my own teachings. It was one of the last few teachings he made before he died. And so you're not supposed to, this third noble truth is not asking for blind faith. That is something different. In fact, that would be anti-Buddhist. You're not supposed to sort of take it just because someone says you should believe it. You just have faith that something in here, there's some truth here that is calling to me. I want to explore it further and deepen my knowledge of this to see if there's something else here for me. But always questioning, always being curious. So the third noble truth tells us that there is a cure for the suffering. You are not stuck in this cycle of suffering. You can get out of this. You can be happy. You can be at peace. And the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. And so these are 8 elements, 8 teachings that tell us about how we should conduct our life. And in the practice of this Eightfold Path, you begin to cure your suffering. I know for myself, the practice of Buddhism has significantly reduced suffering in my life. And I see those examples during very big events in my life, events that most people are distraught in or suffer greatly in. My suffering is greatly diminished. And so that's why I continue to practice Buddhism, because I have seen its effects on my life. And so I encourage you to do the same. Try it out, learn more about it. And if you see good fruits coming from your practice, if you see a benefit to your life, then continue. There's something there for you. And if you are learning Buddhism from me or for someone else, and there's just something does not feel right, question it, explore it. But in the end, the person responsible for your life and your suffering and your happiness is you. And so you're not obligated to stay with any teacher or any Buddhist sect or even this group. You stay only as long as it benefits you, as it helps you grow spiritually. And once it stops doing that, you do what Siddhartha Gautama did. Once he studied with a teacher to a point where the teacher could teach him no more, and he had mastered the skills, he moved on to another teacher. We do this because we are seeking that cure for suffering. And one of the beautiful things that I like about Buddhism is that we have within us what we need to be cured of that suffering. If you never heard the word Buddhism, you would still have what you need to be happy, to be at peace, and to suffer less. what the Buddha taught was simply a method, a practice that seems to work for a lot of people. And so try it out. These Four Noble Truths follow a very ancient pattern, a medical model that was used over 2,000 years ago, where you had the disease, you found the source of the disease, you had faith that you could cure this disease, and then you implemented or you prescribed the actions or the medications that you would take to cure the disease. And that's what the Eightfold Path, that's what the Four Noble Truths does. It identifies the disease, suffering. It identifies the cause of that disease, our desires and our ignorance. It tells us that it can cure the disease. So that's the third noble truth. And then it gives us a prescription for how we should live our life. And that's the fourth noble truth. Next week, we will not have a Dharma talk. We will have a parable. But starting in February, so for those of you who are just hearing this the first time, we'll only meet the first 3 Tuesdays of the month. And the third Tuesday of every month will be a parable, a story, a Buddhist story, and we'll discuss it together as a group. So February 2nd and February 9th, I will continue doing lessons on the Eightfold Path. And we'll start delving in more deeply into the prescription that the Buddha gives us to be happier and how we deal with, how is it that we can still be in pain, but choose not to suffer. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so the teachings of Buddha teach us how to choose not to suffer. So 2nd, the 9th, and then probably you'll go into March 2nd as well. We'll be talking about the Eightfold Path, and I'll break it up. Should you miss any of these, what I like to do is I will take the recordings and I will post them on our Facebook page. And so you're able then to listen to the lessons at that time as well. What I'll do now in these last few minutes is simply open it up to you with any questions you may have, comments, insights that you may have had during your meditation or during the Dharma talk. I'll just open it up to you. Just unmute yourself and chime on in.
I'll ask a silly question. I couldn't help but notice your clock is set on almost 4:20.
Pretty strange.
Okay, and I was wondering if that was to like force focus on your words because it was distracting to me, like if it was a device or not. But
it was not intentional. But if it helped you focus or practice, challenge your focus, then very good. So it says 4:20.
Almost, not quite.
4:20. Subliminal messages to the legislation going on. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Kelly.
So I was noticing during the meditation section, I was trying to work on the word grateful and kept doing that. But what kept coming to my mind as I was breathing out was, and the phrase just kept coming over again and again, is let go of everything that doesn't serve me. And is that a normal thing that subconsciously something comes during that time?
So I believe that especially when you're beginning Buddhism or beginning to practice, trust your instincts. So there is a practice, for example, there is a gatha, and I forgot to mention it today, where you say one thing when you're inhaling and you say something else when you're exhaling.
That's what was happening, but it
wasn't. So if that's what was naturally happening to you, then continue doing that. So maybe as you breathe in, say, I am grateful. And as you exhale, what was the phrase that you were thinking about?
Just kept coming, letting go
Yeah.
I let go of everything that doesn't serve me, and it wouldn't go away.
So then you could say, I am grateful, let go.
Yeah.
I am grateful, let go. And if that's what came to you, if that's what your instincts were telling you to do, then follow that. Because it may be that some internal voice is telling you that there is something to let go of. But by using it as a mantra that you repeat over and over again, you're kind of giving your mind and your unconscious permission to speak to you about what needs to be let go. So practice it some more. Maybe you can spend another 5 to 10 minutes tomorrow, and the day after that, or maybe 2 times this week, spend 5 or 10 minutes and use that, your own personal mantra for those 5, 10 minutes to see what comes up.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm curious. One of the things that I often notice, and it's no matter how long you've been doing meditation, you're always a beginner, it seems like, right? But one thing I've noticed is that when you first begin, we've talked about the monkey mind, right? The monkey jumping around all over the cage, and you won't be still, and you have to settle down. So you relax and you breathe, and then it seems like after a certain point, because in the beginning you're self-conscious about your breathing and sometimes even controlling your breath. But then at a certain point, it seems like the breath changes for me. And it becomes something that I'm truly observing rather than being part of that breath and necessarily thinking too much about the breath. So I guess I'm just wondering if anybody else has experienced that, where as your mind calms down, your breathing also slows down, and sometimes it gets very light. So sometimes your breath, you just barely even notice it because your body's saying, that's all the oxygen I need right now. And so that's interesting to me is observing, because you stay with the breath, and then the breath can teach you things as you study it sometimes, I think. So anyway, that was an interesting, something that happens to me a lot that I enjoy.
It's really good. Thank you, Leon. Any other questions or comments or insights?
Yeah, I agree with Leon. It happens to me where you're almost like, oh, I forgot to breathe.
Leon, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I have the same experience also where one of the really great things about meditation is you're giving yourself permission to just do nothing. And it's amazing how, it's just sometimes that doing nothing can be very active, but it's a unusual experience in the modern time because we put so much emphasis on having to do something and accomplish something.
And to be mentally busy all the time,
Yeah.
right? Thinking about this, thinking about that, planning, worrying about what's happening now, regretting the past, worried about the future.
Yeah. The belief that
Because
boredom
the
is
mind is, if you don't calm it down, it's gonna invent things, right? So.
or the belief that boredom is evil. And so that also is a challenge to Buddhism. We expect that if you're bored, you're doing something wrong. And as far as I know, no one's ever died of boredom. And so they may say I'm dying of boredom, but I've never seen anyone actually die of boredom. And so boredom is just another desire. I desire to be.
And it will pass, just like every other desire.
So boredom is, I desire to be entertained. And so when you recognize your boredom is just another desire, it starts to lose power over you. And it's easier to push through.
Comes back to, remember a few weeks back we were talking about how in English we say, I am hungry, I am bored. We're just taught to immediately associate our whole being with whatever we're feeling at the moment. right? Instead of saying, it's just a thought, it's just a feeling, it'll pass.
Mhm.
In some cultures, they say, I have hunger, or there is hunger. We say, I'm hungry. Leon, I'm hungry. That's all I am right now. I'm nothing else, right?
Good point.
Well, I have a question for you. Is it Alex or Alexander?
Alex is fine. Hey, you,
Alex.
bub.
You said you mentioned, and this, you don't have to answer this if this is too personal, but you said that you have found that your suffering has significantly reduced where others may have found that catastrophic. Would you mind sharing an example?
Just last week, I got laid off from work.
Okay.
So most men, middle age, who have a family, 2 young ones, that would be something that would be a huge blow to their ego. There'd be depression and anger. And unfortunately, in some families, that leads to greater abuse, physical and emotional abuse of other family members. While for me, I felt sad. I felt the uncertainty about what was going to happen now, but I also felt peace, and I also felt gratitude. I'm still healthy. I have a loving, healthy family. I have because I have been blessed with a good education, a PhD, I have options when other men and women who have lost their jobs during COVID don't have that. And so for me to feel like I was like, oh, woe is me, and being all sad and depressed, I felt almost like I was being an elitist brat or an entitled brat. Buddhism also helped me in acknowledging and accepting that I have a right to be sad. I have a right to feel uncertain. I have a right to still feel that right now. You know, in my stomach, I will feel every once in a while that pit of, holy moly, what am I going to do now? I am choosing to feed my peace. I'm choosing to feed my gratitude. Christopher, Vanessa, and Lance, Sochi, you were at last week's Tuesday. I was told on Tuesday that I was laid off. Did you notice anything on Tuesday evening's meditation that something that like that had happened to me? And so that's an example, Erica. What I mean is that things like that can happen to me. And because of my, and it doesn't even have to be the word Buddhism, just the understanding that I have gained through Buddhism gives me a perspective that really significantly diminishes the amount of suffering in my life and the amount of suffering I bring into other people's life. So it's I could have very easily made my life miserable for my children and for my wife last week. But I didn't, because I was able to be very mindful, not only of my right to feel these negative emotions and own them and honor them and respect them, but also consciously choose to feed and to focus on peace and gratitude.
Great, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, when I lost my father, the same thing. So when all of a sudden I literally became the man of the house, and I had to take care of my mother. Buddhism helped tremendously during that time, and people were shocked at how well I took it. But it's because the understanding that comes from a deep practice of Buddhism really makes it easier to go through those things. It's not like it does not take away the sadness. It does not take away the anger or the sense of loss. What it does is diminishes the suffering. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. The pain of loss is going to happen. You are going to lose something in your life. You don't have to suffer though. We have 4 minutes left. If anyone wants to make any last minute comments or questions or insights.
I just had a quick question. So in Buddhism, in the Western Buddhism, is is the third noble truth kind of the only element of faith in like the Buddhist religion? Would you say? Because I know in other religions, like Christian religions, there's many different elements of like the faith portion, like that
Yeah.
you're supposed to
So,
believe in.
yeah. So I wouldn't say it's the only element of faith, because all the other teachings that come after the Four Noble Truths support the Four Noble Truths. So there's that, even at all the teachings, there is an element of faith that there is some truth here.
So maybe,
And that what was that, Leon?
I'll say maybe the difference there is blind faith
Correct.
as opposed to informed faith.
So I'm not being asked to blindly accept that the Buddha is enlightened.
That's right. The doctor has, he's given me the prescription. I have to have some faith in that doctor in order to take that prescription. But I don't know what's going to happen when I take it. I have to believe that, this sounds good, but the only way I'm going to know is to find out for myself.
Yeah. And going back to the Christianity thing, it is incredible how I have a deeper understanding of, for example, the Catholics have this belief of, it's called consubstantiation, where the bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Christ. Buddhism has given me a completely different understanding of that, to the point where it's like, oh, okay, I can accept it now. And so there's a deeper meaning, a deeper understanding, but you gotta kind of have to find it for yourself. And that really is the important element. In the Western culture, in America, we have this tendency of wanting to seek out a guru. And so I cannot, I've lost count of the number of times I am expected to be the master or the guru or the person with all the answers, that I'm supposed to make your life better. And that's not Buddhism. The moment I feel an urge, oh my God, I have to help this person, I must find a cure for them, I'm losing the essence of Buddhism, which is you are in control of your happiness and your suffering. And so Buddhism prescribes ways, practices that help you uncover that inner Buddha. And so all of us are described in Buddhist scriptures as Buddhas to be, future Buddhas. The idea is that each of us have everything we need to become enlightened creatures. It's just a matter of uncovering it little by little. Or in Zen Buddhism, sometimes all of a sudden. And so that's a whole nother philosophical argument. You have some people in Buddhism who believe you can get enlightenment like that, and other people who believe enlightenment is something that slowly evolves. But that's for another topic.
Maybe it's a little of both.
Yeah, it could be a little of both. That's my experience.
I have to say that I really loved and embraced that whole notion that you just said, that it's within us, because I think that's part of what I've always felt. I'm just not sure if I'm always in the right path or direction, but yeah, I really can embrace the notion completely.
Good.
One of the great metaphors in Buddhism I like is the mirror. So if you're looking in a mirror and the mirror's dirty, it's either going to not reflect you or it's going to distort your face and you're not really seeing what's there. But through spiritual practice, we polish that mirror. Our perfect face is already there behind the grime, so to speak. And our practice removes that grime so we can just see clearly. It's already there. You don't have to make anything or get anything from anybody.
I think those are wonderful words to end on. Thank you, Leon.
You're welcome.
So good luck to all of you in uncovering the perfect mirror image. I hope that you got something out of today's meeting and that you will continue to join us. Next week, Leon will be leading us on sort of a group discussion on the parables. And it's a really great way of just listening to a good story and then just telling us what you think, what came to your mind. And so there's no right or wrong answer.